COVID-19 vaccinations. Now, here in Connecticut, according to what the governor says, and according to what I hear from people, by the way, producer Eric gets his first shot tomorrow. So good on you, Mr. Producer. According to what we're seeing, though, hearing here on the radio station from experts and from Governor Ned Lamont, we're doing okay here in Connecticut. Not a great overall number, but we're getting there. In fact, I think so far at least about 140,000 people have gotten their first of a two-stage shot here, and about 8,000 or so have gotten the second. But we're hearing different things now about releasing the entire stockpile. Some experts say, yeah, let's get it into as many people as possible. Others are saying, well, you got to cross your fingers then, and you have production problems. The feds are saying start vaccinating people 65 and over. Connecticut is saying no, 75 and over. Let's see if we can hash it. Ending this out, Dr. Sarah Crawford, professor of biology at Southern Connecticut State University, joins us again. She's been with us a number of times. Professor Crawford, Paul here again. How are you?
Hello, Paul. How are you? It's a pleasure to talk to you again today.
Well, thank you. Well, you have seen Professor Crawford, a little bit of jockeying, a little bit of change of position here. A lot to talk about.
Yes.
Let's start initially with first the Biden camp was deliberating this. Now the Trump camp, Secretary Azar said this morning, the notion of Professor Crawford not holding back some of these doses for a second shot as a safeguard in case of a production problem. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I've been following this rather closely. This scenario first developed in the United Kingdom, where a couple of weeks ago they decided to release their entire stockpile. And initially there was a lot of resistance among scientists and even the federal government in the United States. But now taking a closer look at what's going on in terms of the continuously escalating number of cases and deaths, and the fact that we seem to have a bottleneck in terms of vaccine distribution. There are about 10% of the expected total number of individuals have been vaccinated so far. And we don't have enough vaccine to vaccinate as many as we need to in order to stop this upward spiral. So the idea is that we'll release everything we have, and hopefully there'll be enough to give people the second dose within approximately a month. But at the very least, what you're doing is giving the first dose, which in the UK, they found that may afford up to 60 to maybe even 70% protection by itself. And secondly, the number of hospitalizations goes way down after the first administration. So I think the first vaccine seems to prevent the more serious consequences of infection, which is really what we're aiming for now globally, to bring down the death rate, if nothing else.
All right, Dr. Crawford, hang on. We'll do a quick break. Back with more of this fascinating discussion, more with Dr. Sarah Crawford momentarily. First traffic and weather together, right here on WICC. Seen from over the weekend now till even today as the Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar comes out this morning and says, okay, maybe we too will do what the Biden folks want to do. And that would be to release all doses available as they're made of the coronavirus vaccine and get at least a first dose in them. Professor of Biology, Dr. Sarah Crawford, joins us once again from Southern Connecticut University. You know, Dr. Crawford, I was reading over the weekend, some very kind of cautious statements, especially from Pfizer, saying, hey, they're trying to dance a line here. They're saying, hey, our FDA approval was given on 2 shots 21 days apart. What are your thoughts on that? And I guess the notion is that it's not awful if you go to 28 days, or I can understand why the company's in a tough situation.
Yes, they are. And actually, we're all in a tough situation because this vaccine, the vaccines by Pfizer and Moderna, were released in record time. And we have to keep track of the fact that the results have really been stunningly positive overall. But keep in mind that we haven't really done a thorough investigation of the parameters involved. I mean, nobody knows what the ideal dosing situation would be. We had limited clinical trials. We saw very high efficacy. And now we're dealing with not just the vaccine itself, but the logistics of distribution and a pandemic that is clearly spiraling increasingly out of control. So you have to do a risk-benefit analysis. And there are many opinions, but I think that, of course, Pfizer is concerned and Moderna are concerned that they won't be able to administer the vaccine the way they had planned, and there may be some detriments involved. On the other hand, we have to think about the fact that we are up to 4,000 deaths a day in the United States. So if we can do anything towards mitigation, this is going to have a profound effect. And the fact that in the UK they found that a single dose does seem to prevent very serious complications in most people, I think is very promising. So I think release it all. Hopefully we can get people vaccinated with both doses within the 4-week planned time span, but we're going to do what we can and bring down this epidemic as fast as possible. And then we'll have more data. Every day we develop more data as we administer the vaccine. And this is observational data. It's not the best, but at least we're seeing what's going on. And hopefully we'll be able to bring down these numbers shortly, because not only are the number of cases and deaths skyrocketing, we're seeing very serious mutations in the virus that are of concern. So we want to bring this down before we have further trouble.
The reason, Dr. Crawford, that a lot of health experts, or probably about 50-50, half of them say, hey, this is taking a chance, is they say there's always a possibility of production glitches or production delays. You know, they're not canning tomatoes here.
Right.
They're making vaccines.
Mm-hmm.
How often does that happen? Is that an unfounded fear, or can you recall times when all of a sudden vaccine development lines have to grind to a halt?
Well, you know, the situation here is really very different from traditional cases, say with the flu vaccine, because not only do we have very unstable numbers in terms of incidence rates, but also we have a totally different production platform. And this particular type of RNA vaccine can be fairly readily produced. So although of course we're restraining the production capacities of these pharmaceutical companies because of what's going on, at least we do have a vaccine where the platform is fairly robust in terms of how quickly we can get this RNA vaccine prepared, packaged, and out. In fact, the problem right now isn't production, it's delivery. It's the logistics. We have a lot more vaccine available than we do have immunized individual. The immunization rate is about 10%. So I think what we really need to focus on now is getting what we have out there and distributed, and having people who are in the highest risk classifications vaccinated, and then hopefully by spring we'll be able to move into the entire population in the United States.
Yeah, Dr. Crawford, there was an expert quoted by the New York Times, in fact, from Yale. It was a big story over the weekend, a long story, very well done. And this expert at Yale essentially said what you said. The manufacture of these vaccines is really humming along well. Mm-hmm. The choke point, as he said, is the actual point where somebody rolls up their sleeve and gets the shot.
Absolutely. And it's unfortunately, the logistics are difficult. We have a form of government where we have federal control as well as state control. And the federal government has authorized distribution according to the protocols established by individual states. And the restrictions, I think people are looking at because of the fact that it was so restricted, and the pool of people receiving the vaccine, although certainly understandable in terms of healthcare workers and long-term care facility occupants, it hasn't really, it's kind of made another bottleneck. So that's why I think they're opening it up. There is a significant number of healthcare workers and people who work or reside in long-term care facilities who don't want the vaccine. And we have to respect personal choice. On the other hand, I think it's a good idea to open it up more, because there's a lot of people who want to get the vaccine who can't. So I think we take what we have, distribute it as equitably as possible, and hit as many people as possible who want the vaccine, and then take it from there. But I think really at this point we have to open up more venues for distribution, more places where people can actually get the vaccine. I know Connecticut is thinking about opening the Hartford Center for that. And we really have to start moving this along, because there's no time to waste here.
One other thing before we take a break, Dr. Crawford. The notion I'm seeing of some experts who say it's not a lot, but there's some out there who say, hey, let's try half doses here. You've probably seen that. They're saying there's, some leftover stuff in some of these centers, so we can do half doses. Your reaction to that? I have no idea what I'm talking about here. That sounds a little weird, even to me.
Yes, well, you certainly do sound like you know what you're talking about. But on the other hand, I think you're absolutely right. I think we just can't have a free-for-all, where people just decide what they want to do with this vaccine. It's difficult enough that we may not be able to give people the established protocol of 2 shots within a month. We certainly don't want to be just handing out whatever. That really could create chaos. It'll be very difficult to determine whether or not people are actually protected by the vaccine that they received, how much more to give them in the future. So I don't think we want to play Russian roulette with distribution. I think we have to have a comprehensive plan. I think we have to be flexible and responsive to an ever-changing world pandemic. But on the other hand, we have to use the guidelines that have been established by the clinical trials and ongoing observational studies. And I don't think anything warrants just handing out whatever you happen to have in your back closet,
All right, Dr. Crawford, hang on one more segment with you, if you please. Dr. Sarah Crawford is the guest professor of biology, Southern Connecticut State University. When we come back, we'll ask Dr. Crawford about the ages now for vaccinations. The feds come out today and they say, okay, well, maybe we should do 65 and above. Connecticut and some other states are doing 75 and above. All that and more coming up right here. 346 on the coronavirus vaccines and the divergent dosing here, and now the notion that probably all the vaccine doses we have will be released in a push to get the vaccines into as many arms as possible. A few more minutes with Dr. Sarah Crawford, professor of biology and virology at Southern Connecticut State University. Dr. Crawford, next on the list, we're starting to see a variation here on the lower end of who is going to get vaccinated. The feds today, I think, came out and said, okay, we should start 65 and up. Governor Lamont announced yesterday, no, and here in Connecticut, we're going to be 75 and up. Is that based on science or population or the efficacy of the vaccine? What are your thoughts on that?
Well, it's based on all of the above, actually. The state of Connecticut was in phase 1A, and that is supposed to change around the 14th coming up. So phase 1A was just the healthcare workers, long-term facility residents, and first responders. Then we were moving into phase 1B. And the rationale for phase 1B, which would involve individuals 75 and older, was the fact that their risk for serious disease and death is about 60% higher than younger ages. So that certainly made sense. And then the essential workers and those who work in congregate settings, such as schools. And that was set to roll out in a couple of days. Now with the new CDC and federal advisory from the HHS, they're saying let's go down to 65 because we're seeing such a bottleneck and we want to get this thing moving. And but it will be up to the states to decide. So we're not sure how Connecticut will respond. There's no doubt that we will be vaccinating very shortly by appointment individuals in the phase 1B group that I just mentioned. And they will be opening up new facilities around the state to administer these more adequately. But whether or not Connecticut will adopt the new guideline, 65 which is a significant age drop, we'll have to wait and see. But it's certainly possible that we will do that because the vaccine rate of administration is too low across the board.
Um, Finally here, I know this changes obviously the nature of immunology and virology, infectious diseases, but do we know yet, doctor, do we have any grip yet as to whether or not immunizing against the strains of COVID here, is this going to become a yearly exercise, every couple of years, once in a lifetime, every 3 or 5 years? Any ideas on that yet? Do we have any data?
Well, I think that's a really good question. I mean, it really goes into the analysis of the parameters of the vaccine. In other words, what's the durability? In other words, how long does this vaccine last? And how much protection does it afford? So we know that short term, it's up to 90% or so, which is very high. But do we have proof of immunity? The proof of immunity is to show that someone who received the vaccine doesn't catch the virus or at least doesn't develop a serious illness. And that's going to await further testing. We have to see. We have to see how many vaccinated people, once we get the numbers high enough, how much we see a drop in the incidence of the disease. So we haven't seen that yet. And we haven't really looked a lot at the antibody status of recipients. So we don't really know. And until we know, we can't make a firm decision. But I will say this. It looks like the protection from either having had the disease or the vaccine is at least a couple of months, maybe 5-6 months. And those antibody levels are staying high enough to suggest that it could be even a year or more. I think right now the greatest concern is that these new strains that are developing in the virus may ultimately challenge the ability of this current vaccine to be effective. And there's some concern with the newest strain that's just come out in Japan, where there's some evidence that the spike protein may be so altered as a consequence of mutation that the current vaccines may not work that well. Well, at least it looks like the antibody treatments will not work well. So we'll have to see how that develops. So I think we're running the risk of a virus that can mutate and become so altered over time that we will require a vaccine. And at the same time, look at the efficacy of the vaccine that we have for the current prevailing strains of the virus. So there's no real answer to your question, although it's a very important question. But my guess right now would be a minimum of a year. And if we can get this vaccine out and going and get the herd immunity eventually over the next year, maybe we can bring down the numbers so much that we can have a vaccine that would be stable for several years. And we won't have to deal with this issue in such a way that is currently so catastrophic in terms of the consequences of not getting this under control.
Dr. Sarah Crawford is a professor of biology at Southern Connecticut State University. Dr. Crawford, thank you so much as always. We do appreciate the time straightening this up out for us. Thank you so much, and we'll talk down the road.
Thank you. I look forward to speaking to you again. Have a great day.
Thank